The frontier was a land of silence, stretching endless and unforgiving in every direction, a vast canvas of earth and sky that swallowed men whole. For Silas Brennan, the silence was not just a feature of the landscape. It was a roommate, a constant companion that had settled into the corners of his ranch house 8 months ago and never left, since his father had passed, succumbing to a fever that burned through him faster than a brass fire. Silas had lived in a solitude so profound it felt like a physical weight. He was 24 years old, untouched by a woman's hand, and entirely unprepared for what the wilderness was about to bring to his doorstep. He woke each morning to emptiness, the air in the cabin stale and still. He worked the land until his hands bled, repairing fences that held nothing in and tending to horses that offered no conversation. He fell asleep to the sound of his own breathing, the isolation becoming a second skin, comfortable only in its grim predictability. No one came this far out. No one bothered him. That was the rule of his existence. Until the morning, the rule was broken. It began with a sound of subtle shifting of weight. In his supply shed that didn't belong to the wind or the settling wood, Silas froze, his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. Bandits had been spotted 2 territories over, desperate men who killed for the boots on a man's feet. He set the cup down without a sound and grabbed his rifle from beside the door, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He moved across the yard, his boots silent on the packed earth, approaching the weathered wooden structure where his winter provisions were stored. The door hung slightly ajar, swaying in the morning breeze. Inside, a shadow moved between the sacks of grain and preserved goods. Silas raised the rifle, his finger hovering over the trigger, the cold metal biting into his skin. "Don't move," he rasped, his voice rough from disuse. The figure stepped into the light streaming through the doorway, and every thought in Silas's head went blank. She was not a bandit. She was a force of nature. She was Apache, and she was taller than most men he had ever known, with a physical presence that seemed to fill the small shed. Her hair was a thick braid of midnight black falling down her back, and her skin was sun-darkened, stretching over high, angular cheekbones and a jawline that looked carved from granite. She wore leather clothing that had seen hard use, molded to a body that was powerful and lithe. Across her back was a bow with a quiver of arrows, but it was her eyes that held him fixed. They were dark, almost black, and they held a cold, sharp calculation. She was measuring him, deciding in a split second if he was a threat she needed to end. Silas should have shouted. He should have ordered her off his land. He should have fired a warning shot. But the words caught in his throat. There was something in her face, beneath the warrior's stoicism, something raw and haunted that he recognized because he saw it in his own reflection every morning. She wasn't just stealing. She was surviving. She turned away from him deliberately, dismissing the rifle pointed at her back as if it were a twig, and picked up a sack of dried meat. She didn't run. She didn't ask. She just took. Wait. The word tumbled out of him, unbidden. She froze, then slowly turned her head to look at him over her shoulder. One eyebrow raised, a silent challenge. Silas lowered the rifle, his hands trembling. Slightly not from fear, he realized, but from a sudden, overwhelming shock of adrenaline. "You don't have to steal it," he said, his voice steadier this time. "Take what you need. Just ... don't come back." For a long moment, she stared at him, searching for the trick, the trap that white men always laid. Finding none, she grabbed 2 more sacks, slinging them over her shoulder with a strength that shouldn't have surprised him but did. She walked past him, so close he could smell sage and wood smoke on her skin, so close he could see a fine, pale scar running along her jaw. She didn't thank him. She didn't look back. She walked toward the tree line where the wilderness began, her stride long and purposeful, and disappeared into the shadows between the cottonwoods. Silas stood there long after she was gone, the rifle heavy in his hands, his mind racing with questions that had no answers. He didn't know that, 50 paces into the forest, she had stopped. He didn't know she had turned to look back at the solitary figure by the shed, and that for the first time in months, something other than grief and rage had stirred in her chest. Curiosity, and curiosity, she knew, was a dangerous thing. 3 days passed. 3 days of Silas checking over his shoulder, jumping at the cry of a hawk, lying awake wondering if she would return with a war party to finish what she had started. He was repairing the fence along the eastern pasture, the sun beating down on his neck. When he felt it again, that prickling sensation of being watched, he stopped his work, the mallet heavy in his hand, and turned slowly. She was there, standing at the edge of the tree line maybe 30 paces away. She wasn't hiding. She was just watching. The morning sun caught the sheen of her black hair, and even from this distance, he could feel the intensity of her gaze. She was studying him like a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. Their eyes locked, and the air between them charged with a static electricity that made the fine hairs on his arms stand up. She tilted her head slightly, the corner of her mouth lifting in something that wasn't quite a smile, and then she vanished back into the trees. The next morning, She was closer. She sat on a fallen log just beyond his property line, arms crossed, watching him work on the corral gate. She made no attempt to hide, sitting as bold as the sunrise. Silas tried to ignore her, tried to focus on the wood and the nails, but his curiosity won out. He set down his tools and walked toward her, each step feeling like he was crossing a border between two worlds. She didn't move. She waited, her dark eyes unreadable. He stopped at the property line, an invisible boundary neither had crossed since that first day. Up close, he saw the weariness around her eyes, the tension that held her body like a coiled spring. "Why do you keep coming back?" Silas asked. She didn't answer immediately. She looked him up and down, measuring him again, when she finally spoke. Her English was accented but clear, her voice low and resonant. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Violence. Cruelty. The things men usually offer." She stood, and he was reminded again of her height. Her eyes were level with his. "But you gave me food? You let me go? Why?" Silas swallowed hard. "You looked like you needed it more than I did." Something shifted in her expression. The hard edges of her face seemed to blur slightly. "You live alone," she stated. It wasn't a question. "Yes, so do I." She said it like a confession, admitting a weakness she wasn't used to acknowledging. "My name is Silas." She studied him for another heartbeat. Nakoha. The name settled between them, heavy and significant. She turned to leave, but this time she looked back before disappearing, and Silas felt a tightening in his chest that was equal parts fear and anticipation. She returned the next day at noon. This time, she didn't stop at the tree. She walked straight across his property, past the corral, right up to where he sat on the porch steps eating a meager lunch of dried meat and stale bread. Silas froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. Nako had stopped 3 feet away, close enough that he had to tilt his head back to look at her. "You are afraid of me?" she observed. "I'm not," he lied, though his hands were shaking. "Good fear keeps you alive." She sat down beside him on the stub. She was close, so close that her shoulder almost brushed his, and the heat radiating from her body was palpable. "But that is not why your hands shake when I am near." Heat flooded Silas's face. He set his bread down, his appetite gone. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." She turned to look at him fully, and the directness of her gaze stripped away every defense he had. "You watch me the way a starving man watches food, the way a man in the desert watches water." Silas's throat closed. He wanted to deny it, wanted to run, but he was paralyzed by her inertness. Nakoa leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper that scraped against his nerves. "I have not lain with a man in 6 months, not since my husband died. Do you know what 6 months of wanting feels like?" Silas. The world narrowed to just the two of them, the vast frontier disappearing until only the porch and her dark eyes remained. His voice cracked. "I wouldn't know." She pulled back slightly, studying his face. Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed by something softer, something that looked like hunger. "You have never been with a woman?" Shame burned through him. "No," he admitted, the word barely a whisper. Nakoha's hand came up, her rough, calloused fingers tracing the line of his jaw. The touch was electric, shocking in its gentleness. "That is not something to be ashamed of." "Then why do I feel like it is?" "Because you think it makes you less." Her thumb brushed across his lower lip, and his breath hitched. "But maybe, maybe it makes you more." For a moment, there was peace. A fragile, impossible connection blooming in the shadow of the wilderness. But then Nakoha went rigid. Her hand dropped from his face, her head snapping toward the eastern trees. The softness vanished, replaced instantly by the warrior's mask. "They are looking for me," she whispered, her voice flat and cold. Silas blinked, the spell broken. "Who? My people?" She stood up, her hand flying to the knife at her belt. "I have been gone too long." 3 men emerged from the tree line, moving with the silent, terrifying grace of predators. They were Apache warriors, weapons drawn, their faces painted with the hard lines of suspicion and authority. They saw Nakoa standing over Silas, saw the white man sitting at her feet in a position of perceived weakness. The lead warrior's eyes narrowed, and he barked a command in a language Silas felt in his gut, rather than understood, a sound like stones grinding together. Nakoa answered in the same tongue, her voice sharp and defiant. The warrior took a threatening step forward, his hand tightening on his bow. The other 2 fanned out, flanking them, cutting off any escape. Silas stood slowly, keeping his hands visible and empty, his mind racing through a list of bad options. These men could kill him without breaking a sweat, burn his ranch to ash, and vanish before the smoke cleared. And Nakoha, standing between him and them, looked like she was weighing the cost of a fight she couldn't win. The lead warrior spoke again, and this time, Nakoha's shoulders tensed. Whatever he said, it wasn't a request. It was an order. She turned to look at Silas one last time. In that fleeting glance, he saw everything they hadn't said: the curiosity, by the hunger, the shared loneliness, and something that looked devastatingly like a promise, broken before it could be made. Then, she walked toward her people. Hands clenched into fists at his sides, every instinct screaming at him to grab her, to stop her, even though he knew it would mean his death. He watched as they swallowed her back into the forest, leaving him alone with the silence once more. 2 nights later, the silence broke. Silas woke to the sharp clack of a pebble hitting his window pane, then another. He grabbed his rifle and moved to the glass, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Below, in the pale wash of moonlight, he saw her. Nakoha stood in his yard, her chest heaving, her face bruised dark purple along one cheekbone. She gestured urgently toward the house. Silas didn't think. He didn't hesitate. He ran downstairs and threw open the door. She pushed past him, stumbling into the room, her eyes wild as she scanned the darkness behind her. "They are coming," she rasped, not far behind. "What happened?" Silas locked the door, a futile gesture against what was coming. "I refused to marry the man they chose for me. I told him I would choose my own path." She touched the bruise her face without flinching, her voice trembling with adrenaline. "My brother did this. He said I'd dishonor our family. Said I'd dishonor my dead husband's memory." Silas heard it then, voices in the distance, carrying on the wind. The warriors, who were tracking her, and they were close. "The cellar," Silas said, grabbing her arm. "Under the kitchen rug." He pulled her toward the small trapdoor hidden beneath the woven fabric. "It's tight, but it's hidden." She hesitated, her eyes meeting his. In the dim light, the warrior's mask was gone, replaced by a raw vulnerability that stole the breath from his lungs. She nodded. Silas led her down into the darkness, a cramped space barely tall enough to stand in, lined with shelves of preserved goods and the earthy smell of potatoes. He climbed down after her and pulled the door shut above them, plunging them into absolute blackness. The silence of the cellar was heavy, suffocating. He could hear her breathing fast, shallow gasps. He could feel the heat of her body radiating in the confined space. They were standing so close that when he shifted his weight, his chest brushed against her shoulder. "They will search the house," she whispered, her breath warm against his neck. "If they find us like this, then we stay quiet." Footsteps thundered above them, heavy boots crossing his floorboards, the sound magnified by the wood. Silas' hand found Nakoha's in the dark, and she gripped it hard enough to bruise. Her other hand pressed flat against his chest, and he knew she could feel his heart hammering against her palm like a trapped bird. Voices shouted overhead, angry searching, the sound of furniture being overturned, glass breaking. They were tearing his life apart, looking for her. Nakoha's fingers curled into his shirt, her body rigid against his. In the pitch black, stripped of sight, Silas's other senses went into overdrive. The scent of sage and sweat in her hair, the warmth of her skin through the leather, the way her breath hitched when his thumb inadvertently brushed her knuckles. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The warriors moved through every room, their footsteps pausing directly above the trapdoor before moving on. Silas held his breath, feeling Nakoha do the same. Their bodies pressed closer in the dark, seeking reassurance, seeking an anchor in the storm. Finally, the footsteps reached, the voices faded. Silence settled back over the house like dust, but neither of them moved. Nakoha's forehead rested against his collarbone now, her breathing steadier, but still fast. His free hand had somehow found her waist, his fingers splayed against the soft leather of her tunic. "Silas," her voice was barely a ghost of a sound. "What you said before, about never being with a woman." He swallowed hard. Not the best time for that conversation. There may not be another time. She lifted her head. Even in the darkness, he could feel the intensity of her gaze, the magnetic pull of her presence. "They will not stop looking for me. If they find me with you, they will kill us both." "And then why did you come here?" The answer came not in words, but in action. Her lips found his in the darkness, and every thought in Silas's head scattered, like leaves in a gale. She kissed him with a hunger that was terrifying and beautiful, a desperate claiming of life in the face of death. Her hands moved to his face, his neck, his shoulders, pulling him down to her. He responded instinctively, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. He tasted desperation and desire on her lips, a mixture so potent it made his knees weak. When she pulled back, they were both gasping for air. "That is why," she whispered against his mouth, "because in 6 months of grief and rage and loneliness, you are the only thing that has made me feel alive again." "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted, his voice rough. "Neither do I anymore." Her fingers traced his jawline in the dark. "But I know I cannot go back to my people, and I know I cannot stop thinking about you." Above them, the house was silent. The warriors were gone for now, but in the small, dark space, something irrevocable had shifted. Nakoha stayed. For 3 days, she didn't leave his side. The rancho, once Silas's prison of solitude, transformed into something else entirely. Charged and alive, she worked alongside him without being asked, helping him repair the fence the warriors had damaged, hauling water from the well, moving with an efficiency that spoke of a lifetime of hard survival. and every moment they spent together, the air between them grew heavier with unspoken things. On the second morning, they were in the barn tending to the horses. Silas reached for a bridle at the same moment Nakoha did. Their hands collided. Both froze. The touch lasted maybe 2 seconds before they pulled away, but Silas's skin burned where her fingers had brushed his. "Sorry," he muttered, turning away to hide the flush rising in his neck. "Do not apologize for touching me." Her voice carried an edge that made him look up. She was watching him with that direct, stripping gaze. "Unless you do not want to. That's not I. ... He stopped, unsure how to articulate the storm inside him. She stepped closer. Close enough that he could see the pulse beating at the base of her throat. "You are afraid of wanting me. Why?" "Because I don't know how to want someone like this." The admission tore out of him, raw and honest. "Everything I know tells me you're dangerous, that I should send you away. But every time I try to think about you leaving, I can't breathe right." Something softened in her expression. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his cheek. "You think I am not afraid? I am terrified, Silas. 6 months ago, I buried the man I thought I would grow old with. I swore I would never let anyone close again. And then you appear, with your soft hands and your softer heart, and I cannot stop myself from wanting things I have no right to want." "What things?" Instead of answering, she kissed him again. Slower this time, less desperate, more deliberate. She was learning the shape of his mouth, the taste of him. His hands found her waist, pulling her in, and she made a low sound in her throat that sent heat flashing through his entire body. "I want that," she whispered against his lips when they broke apart. "I want to feel something other than grief. I want to remember what it is to be touched with gentleness instead of duty." She looked deep into his eyes. "And I want it to be you. Not just anyone. You. You make it very hard to keep my walls up, Nakoha." "Good," she said, a small, fierce smile touching her lips. "Because you have already torn down all of mine." That evening, they sat on the porch as the sun set, bleeding red and orange across the horizon. Shoulders touching, hands intertwined, they watched the day die. "Tell me about him," Silas said quietly. "Your husband." Nakoha was quiet for a long time. "His name was Takakota. He was a strong hunter, a good man. He died defending our camp from raiders. He bled out in my arms while I could do nothing but watch." Her grip on Silas's hand tightened until her knuckles turned white. "The tribe expects me to honor his memory by marrying his brother, producing sons to carry on his bloodline, as if I am property to be transferred along with his horses and his weapons." "You're not property." "No, I am not." She turned to look at him, her eyes clear and certain in the dying light. "That is why I will not go back, even if it means being hunted, even if it means—" She stopped mid-sentence, her head snapping toward the eastern tree. Silas followed her gaze and saw it, a thin line of black smoke rising against the darkening sky. It wasn't a campfire. It was too wide, too deliberate. "They have brought more warriors," Nakoa said, her voice going flat. "They are not searching anymore. They are coming to take me by force." Silas stood, his heart sinking like a stone. "How many?" "Too many." She rose beside him, her hand going instinctively to her knife. "They will not leave without me. And if you stand in their way, Silas Stata, they will kill you without hesitation." The torches appeared then, a line of fire cutting through the twilight, moving steadily toward the ranch house. They were coming, and Silas knew, with a terrifying clarity, that the quiet life he had known was over. He had a choice to make, one that would likely end with him buried in the hard earth of his father's land. He looked at the woman standing beside him, the woman who had broken into his life and stolen his heart in a matter of days. He looked at the fire coming to consume them, and he realized he wasn't afraid of dying. He was only afraid of living without her. 7 warriors emerged from the darkness, their torches casting long, dancing shadows across the yard. The firelight flickered on their painted faces, turning them into specters of judgment. The lead warrior, the same man from the first encounter, stepped forward. His eyes found Nakoa instantly, hard and unforgiving, before sliding to Silas with open contempt. He spoke in Apache, his voice a guttural command that carried across the cool night air. Nakoa answered, stepping in front of Silas. Her hand remained on her knife, but she didn't draw it. The warrior barked something else, gesturing sharply at her, then at the forest behind him. "What's he saying?" Silas asked quietly, his eyes never leaving the weapons in the warrior's hands. "He says I have shamed my family," Nakoa translated, her voice steady but tight. "That I have dishonored Takakota's memory by refusing his brother, that I must return now, or be declared dead to the tribe." She paused, her jaw tightening. "He says if I do not come willingly, they will burn this place to the ground. With you inside?" The warrior spoke again, and this time Silas caught a repeated word, a name. "My brother is waiting," Nakaha whispered, a tremor finally entering her voice. "He says Takakota's brother has the right to claim me, that this is not negotiable." Silas looked at the 7 armed men, at the torches sputtering in the wind, at Nakaha standing rigid beside him, caught between two worlds. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at him to step back, to let her go, to save himself. He was one untrained man against 7 hardened fighters. He had no chance. 0. But when he opened his mouth, the word that came out wasn't a please. The single syllable cut through the night like a gunshot. The warrior shifted, hands tightening on bows and knives. Nakoa whipped her head around to look at him, her eyes wide with shock and terror. Silas. You cannot. I said no. He stepped forward, moving deliberately until he stood between her and the lead warrior. His hands were shaking, but he forced them to his sides. She stays here. Not because I'm forcing her, not because you're forcing her, but because she chose to. The lead warrior's expression darkened. He stepped closer, the heat of his torch washing over Silas's face. He spoke, sharply, a sneer curling his lip. He says you are a fool, Nakoha translated, her hand gripping the back of Silas's shirt. He says one white man cannot stand against Apache warriors. He says your death will mean nothing. Maybe, Silas said, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst through his ribs. But if dying means she gets to choose her own life, then I'll die. Because that's what decent men do. They stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. Even when they're terrified. Even when they know they'll lose. Nakoha made a sound behind him, something between a gasp and a sob. The lead warrior studied Silas for a long, agonizing moment. The contempt in his eyes didn't vanish, but it shifted, replaced by a flicker of confusion. He asked a question, his tone less angry, almost curious. He wants to know why, Nakoa whispered. Why you would die for a woman who is not yours. Silas didn't hesitate. He didn't look back at her. He looked straight into the warrior's dark eyes. Tell him she is mine, and tell him I am hers. Tell him we choose each other. When Nakaha translated the words, the air in the yard changed. The warriors exchanged glances. The lead warrior looked from Silas to Nakaha, seeing the way she stood, close to him, the way her hand clutched his shirt. He saw a bond that defied their laws and their expectations. He spoke at length, his voice hard but no longer threatening immediate violence. He says ... Nakoha's voice caught. He says if I choose to stay with you, I can never return. I will be dead to my people. My name will not be spoken. My family will mourn me as if I have passed. But ... She took a breath. But they will leave. USB. The choice hung in the air like smoke. Silas could feel the weight of it pressing down on her. He wanted to beg her to stay, but he kept his mouth shut. This had to be her decision. Not his. Not her brother's. Hers. Nakoha was silent for what felt like an eternity. Then, she stepped up beside Silas, her hand sliding down his arm to lace her fingers through his. She looked at the lead warrior and spoke in Apache, her voice clear, strong, and final. The warrior's expression hardened into a mask of stone. He spat on the ground, a final gesture of dismissal, and turned away. The others followed, their torches retreating into the forest, fading like dying stars until the darkness swallowed them whole. They stood in the yard long after the lights disappeared, hands still clasped. Neither speaking. You did not have to do that, Nakoha said finally, her voice rough with emotion. You could have died. I know. Then why? Silas turned to face her. In the moonlight, he saw tears tracking down her cheeks. First time he had ever seen her cry. Because 6 months ago, I buried my father and thought I would spend the rest of my life alone. I thought that was just what my life would be. Empty. Safe. He reached up and brushed a tear from her jaw with his thumb, and then you showed up. And you made me feel things I didn't know I could feel. You made me realize that safety isn't living. It's just existing. Nakoa closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. I have given up everything for this. For you. No, Silas whispered, and I'll spend every day making sure you never regret it. She opened her eyes, and the vulnerability there took his breath away. Take me inside. Silas, I need to feel something real. Something good. They barely made it through the door before she was kissing him. A desperate, affirming collision of mouths and bodies. The urgency carried them up the stairs, stumbling and eager. But when they reached the bedroom, the frenzy slowed. It became something tender, something reverent. I don't know what I'm doing, Silas admitted again, his voice shaking as they stood in the dark. Neither do I, Nakoa whispered, guiding his hands. My it was duty, quick, practical. I do not know how to do this. Slowly. How to make it mean something beyond just Bodhi's joining. Then we'll figure it out together. What followed was awkward and fumbling and utterly perfect. In the darkness, Silas learned the landscape of her body, every scar, every curve, and Nakoha for the first time learned what it was to be touched with awe rather than expectation. When they finally came together, it wasn't just physical release. It was a sealing of the pact they had made in the yard. Two broken people finding home in each other. 3 months passed like water running through a clear stream. The ranch, once a monument to Silas's solitude, was transformed. The fences were mended, tight and strong. A new garden thrived near the house, green shoots pushing up through the earthen patterns Nakoha remembered from her childhood. Silas sat on the porch, a cup of coffee in his hands, watching the morning sun illuminate the corral. Inside the enclosure, Nakoha was working with the mare that had been skittish ever since his father died. Her movements were fluid, patient. She spoke to the animal in low tones, her hand resting gently on its neck. The horse lowered its head, finally trusting. Silas smiled. He felt different now. He walked taller. The silence of the frontier no longer oppressed him. It was just a backdrop to the life they were building. Nakoha looked up and caught him watching. That small, rare smile curved her lips. She walked over, climbing the porch steps to sit beside him on the bench he had built for them. "You are staring, again," she said, stealing a sip of his coffee. "Can't help it. Still can't believe you're real." "I am very real." She handed the cup back, her shoulder pressing comfortably against his. "And I am not going anywhere." "Do you regret it?" Silas asks quietly. The question still haunted him sometimes. Giving up everything. Nakoha looked out at the horizon, considering. "I gave up a life where I had no voice, where I would have been passed from one man to another like a possession." She turned to him, her eyes clear. "What I found here is worth more than everything I left behind. I found freedom. I found partnership. I found a man who sees me as an equal." "I found the same thing," Silas said, taking her hand. "You saved me, you know. I was just waiting for life to happen to me. You made me reach for it." She leaned her head on his shoulder, the morning sun warming them both. "We saved each other." A month later, they stood together on a rise, overlooking their land. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of fire and violet. Silas pulled Nakoha close, and she fit against him as if she had been made for that space. "My father used to say," Silas murmured, "that a man's wealth isn't measured in gold or land. It's measured in the moments that take his breath away." He looked down at her, at the woman who had walked out of the wilderness and changed his entire world. "I'm the richest man alive." Nakoha left us on that was full and free and pulled him down for a kiss. In that kiss was everything they had survived. The fear, the courage, the sacrifice. They had both been broken, both been alone. But out here on the edge of the world, they had built something that neither could have created alone. A life chosen freely, a love earned. And in the end, that was the only story that mattered.